Just finished up using these VR08GP tires at the first competition event on the OTA calendar. I did have some time on the tires prior to this event, which was probably about 15 laps here at TMP, just getting a feel for the tires, not really playing with the pressures at all. What I learned with those laps was that the tires don't really like super high pressure. They seem to slip a little bit when they're at 40 psi hot. So going into this first time attack event, I knew I wanted to drop them down to a more commonly used cold air pressure with respect to other 200 treadwear tires. In the first session, the ground temp was about 22 degrees Celsius, so I started off with a 26 psi cold pressure, and it felt pretty good. They only took one lap to warm up, and they stayed consistent for the duration of my session. These are certainly a time attack tire, and I didn't run them for more than 15 minutes at a time, so I can't comment on their use for longer sessions. However, that would sort of be useless since any longer of a session would not fit within the intended design of the tire. As the day progressed, I got much more comfortable with getting on the power early, and the tires really did seem to handle quick inputs of the throttle very well. The car exited corners predictably and did not seem to throw me into a slide as much as some of the other tires I've driven in the past, even on my 4th or 5th lap out. When the ground got up to about 45 to 50 degrees surface temperature, I wanted to try dropping the pressures even further, down to a 21 to 22 psi cold, and despite the low pressure, I really didn't feel the tires rolling over. So I think there's a really stiff sidewall on these, and they did slow down in terms of how much minimum speed they can carry, and I felt like they started to understeer a little bit when the pressure was too low. So some positives. My favorite feature of these tires is that when the pressures felt right, the driver input seemed to result in a really predictable output in the tire, as if the relationship was like 1-to-1. When I started to make mistakes in my second competition session, it was so easy for me to just draw back to mentally cool down and prioritize the following lap. The tires don't ask to be aggressively driven to build temperature. They just heated up and stayed hot for the duration of my session, and I didn't have to worry about them at all. They allowed me to focus on myself as a driver, and I think that's what makes them so rewarding to drive, especially on this car. And I'll be honest, the main con is just their tread depth. They don't come with a lot of tread, look to be about maybe 4 to 5 30 seconds from new, and now they're at the wear bars, which is 230 seconds. This is not to say they wear quickly, they just didn't have a lot of tread depth to start with. So because of how responsive the tires feel, how stiff the sidewalls are, and how much grip they have, and even this 225 size, I would say the pros highly outweigh the cons of their tread depth being a little bit short. Doing a quick data comparison between the 225 VR08GP against the 245 Hankook RS4, you can clearly see these tires make about the same G, about 1.2 to 1.3. I think the data is more or less comparable, as the conditions were pretty similar, so I don't feel bad about making the comparison between these two, despite the track days being completely separate. There are a couple other variables that you guys might think impact the results of the data. And just so you know, the alignment settings between these two track days were more or less the same, although I am running a different suspension setup, where the RS4 were on a Swift lowering spring and stock dampers, and the track day on the VR08GP, I'm using the HSD Monopro coilovers, which are a pretty basic off-the-shelf option. But if you guys see our video debunking the myths between coilovers and stock suspension, you'd know that coilovers don't necessarily add grip. They never started with a lot of life, and after 2 track days and about 5,000 kilometers of driving, this is how much the tires have worn. The center rib didn't seem to wear as deeply as, you know, sometimes an RE71 would, where you just see like no height here and then a taller edge of the rib here. So this is looking really nice to me. There isn't a lot of like cross-directional graining, which I like, so the tire is actually pretty resilient. There was a rib here that was going down this outside shoulder, and that has seemed to completely disappeared, and there just seems to be a little bit of graining in the middle where that was. So I guess they knew where the pressure force would be between like this big shoulder here. I feel like the tire is designed to operate along here and not roll so much over the edge. And if we look at the edge here, there's actually not a ton of wear of the tire like rolling over, and that's how I know the sidewall is just extremely stiff. And I bet I could even afford to put a 235 on this 7-inch wheel and be okay with it, just because of how stiff the sidewall is. Just comparing it to like my RS4, like you can see a lot of the shoulder wear here. I'm not seeing a lot of that on the Valino. It's crazy because on this tire, this is a 225, and the RS4 that I just showed was a 245. So there's just more pressure per inch on the contact patch, and yet the shoulder is really survived much better. And this again is the front left tire, which all the tracks in Ontario are clockwise tracks, so this should in theory be the worst. To conclude, the VR08GP are a great time attack option in the 200 treadwear category. They have an awesome feel and they make just about as much grip as the Hankook RS4. They're quick to warm up and they're resilient for the duration of your time attack sessions. Although they don't have the deepest tread, they do have a super wide outside shoulder to help out the wear, and under my use they've worn pretty evenly, and if they start to go uneven, I can definitely just rotate them for even longer usage. Just be careful using these in the rain if you're driving on the street between track days, because the super wide outside shoulder, stiff sidewalls, and lack of rain grooving in these tires make them a really poor choice for driving in heavy rain. They seem to hydroplane a lot quicker than other tires I've driven, but like many other 200 treadwear tires, you can still feel the compound doing a lot of the work in the wet, as long as there isn't a standing puddle on the surface. I would wholly recommend these to anybody looking for a different 200 treadwear option, as they're grippy, have decent composure on the street, since they're not nearly as loud as an RE71-R, and honestly in the past year that we've had, it's getting harder to source some of these 200 treadwear tires, so if you're in Canada and some other shops are missing out on some of the options in this category, I would definitely consider the VR08GP as one of your options as a time attack and autocross tire.